The promise. The sky above the old slave market was covered with dark clouds. Heavy rain fell like cold needles, turning the broken stone roads into thick rivers of mud. The sound of chains mixed with the shouting of merchants, creating a heavy noise that spread through the entire place. Strange lights from alien ships shone down, making the wet ground sparkle like a twisted mirror. In the center of the market stood a line of rusty cages. Inside one of those cages sat a young alien girl. Her silver skin was dirty, her thin hands were marked with red scars, and her glowing blue eyes stared at the ground without emotion. She had been taken from her home many months ago, sold and resold like an object. Her name was Auri, but here no one called her by name. A human boy named Elias walked through the market that day. He was only 12 years old. His father worked at a nearby repair station, and Elias often ran off to explore the crowded streets. He liked adventure, but this time something different pulled him into the market. He followed the sound of the rain, the chains, and the quiet crying of slaves. Elias held a small piece of bread in his hand. It was warm, fresh from the family kitchen. As he walked between the cages, he saw the alien girl. She was sitting alone in the mud, smaller than the others. Her back was straight even though she looked weak. Her eyes had a quiet fire in them, something that caught Elias's heart immediately. He walked closer, ignoring the merchant's angry shout. The merchant barked at him, warning that touching slaves was not allowed. But Elias didn't stop. He knelt beside the cage and pushed the piece of bread through the bars. Auri slowly raised her head. Her glowing eyes met his. She hesitated, as if she had forgotten what kindness looked like. Finally, she took the bread gently with her trembling fingers. She held it carefully, as if it was something precious. Elias smiled. His voice was soft. "Eat," he whispered. Auri stared at him, confused. Nobody had ever spoken to her that way before. The merchant laughed at the boy. "She's not a pet, boy. She's property," he said. But Elias ignored him completely. He leaned closer to the bars. Rain dripped from his hair onto his face, but he didn't care. Something inside him told him this moment was important. "My name is Elias," he said. "What's yours?" Auri's voice was quiet, almost broken. "Auri," she whispered. Elias pressed his hand against the cold bars. His eyes were serious in a way no child's eyes should be. "Auri," he said slowly, "one day I will come back here. I will set you free." Auri blinked. Her heart beat faster. No one had ever said such words to her. She wanted to believe him, but the world had taught her that hope was dangerous. She shook her head slightly, but Elias didn't stop. "And when you are free," he continued, "I will marry you." The merchant burst into loud laughter. People passing by laughed too. "A human boy marrying a slave alien girl," one man shouted. "How stupid," another yelled. But Elias didn't even look at them. His small hand stayed on the bars, steady and sure. For the first time in years, Auri smiled. It was small, soft, and filled with a kind of shy light. She reached out and placed her hand on his through the bars. Their fingers didn't fully touch, but the feeling was real. In that moment, two children from different worlds made a silent promise. The merchant pushed Elias away. "Get lost, boy," he shouted. Elias fell in the mud but quickly stood back up. He looked at Auri one last time, his clothes soaked, his face dirty, his eyes burned with determination. "I promise," he said again, loudly this time. His voice echoed through the rain. "I will come back for you." Auri held the bread close to her chest. Her eyes followed him until he disappeared into the crowd. She repeated his words again and again in her mind. Like a secret spell, "He will come back," she whispered to herself. That night, as she sat in the cold cage, Auri didn't feel completely alone. For the first time, there was a spark in her heart. She didn't know when or how, but she believed his words. A small promise between a boy and a slave girl became the only light in her dark world. Far away, Elias looked back at the market from a high street. Rain still poured over the cages, but in his heart, a fire had started. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he knew he could not forget her. He made a silent vow under the stormy sky. He would return, no matter what it took. Separation and war. The years that followed their promise were not kind to either Elias or Auri. The galaxy, once balanced in a tense peace between human colonies and alien empires, began to tremble under the weight of political greed and rising hatred. Borders closed, trade routes were seized, and rumors of war spread like fire in dry fields. Elias's quiet coastal town transformed from a place of laughter to a military checkpoint. Ships flew overhead every day, carrying soldiers and supplies toward the frontiers. The air that once smelled of salt and bread was now filled with the metallic scent of weapons and fuel. Life changed quickly, and so did Elias. When Elias turned 15, the first attacks reached their sector, the alien empire. The same one that had enslaved Auri's people and sold her like property, launched a sudden assault on human outposts near the border. Entire stations were burned, families scattered, and every ship that could fly was turned into an evacuation vessel. Elias and his father barely escaped as their town was bombarded from orbit. The sound of explosions shook the ground. Fires painted the sky orange, and the markets where he once met Auri were reduced to ash. He tried to run back to the cage area, desperate to see if she was still there, but soldiers grabbed him. Pulling him toward the last shuttle, he shouted her name, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The shuttle lifted off just as the alien bombardment intensified. From the small window, Elias saw the market crumble under a direct hit. His heart broke as the rusty cages turned into twisted metal. He pressed his hand to the glass, tears mixing with smoke and rain. In that moment, his promise turned into something heavier, no longer a child's dream, but a mission carved deep into his soul. He swore to himself that no matter where she was, he would find her, even if it meant crossing the entire galaxy. Meanwhile, Auri's fate followed a different, darker path. After that rainy day in the market, she was sold again, this time to a wealthy alien noble who dealt in weapons and slaves. She was transported far from the human border, into the Empire's industrial core, where slaves worked in massive factories buried under blackened skies. There, day and night were the same, filled with smoke, noise, and the cold sting of orders barked by overseers. She was still young, but the cruelty of the Empire forced her to grow fast. She learned to keep her head down, to avoid drawing the wrong kind of attention, yet in the darkest moments. She repeated Elias's words to herself like a shield. "I will come back for you." Years passed in this cruel rhythm. She was moved again and again, from factories to transport docks, from mines to servant quarters. Each place tried to erase her identity, but none could touch the memory she held inside. In her heart, she carried the image of a muddy street, a warm piece of bread, and a human boy with determined eyes. That memory was her only comfort. It gave her strength to endure beatings, hunger, and nights when others gave up. She refused to let her spirit be broken because she believed in a promise made long ago. Elias, now older and living on a refugee world, spent every spare moment listening to soldiers' stories. He followed news broadcasts, maps of battles, and rumors about the alien empire's slave routes. He joined the cadet training program, not because he wanted glory, but because he needed power, knowledge, and a way back. His instructors noticed his focus. He was quiet, disciplined, and never backed down during training. The other cadets thought he was driven by hatred for the enemy, but deep inside, his motivation was different. His fuel was a promise whispered through cage bars under the rain. The war escalated as the years passed. Whole star systems fell, fleets were destroyed, and both sides suffered unimaginable losses. Humans, though technologically weaker in some areas, fought with unmatched creativity and resilience. Their fleets learned to strike fast, retreat smart, and use every piece of debris as a weapon. Elias rose through the ranks quickly, his intelligence and determination standing out. He wasn't the strongest, but he saw patterns others didn't. He became a strategist, someone who could read the battlefield like a story. His goal was clear: climb high enough to have access to information, to missions, to places where slaves might be freed, because somewhere out there, Auri still lived and he intended to find her. On the other side of the galaxy, Auri had grown into a young woman. Her silver skin carried new scars. Her glowing blue eyes held a quiet fire that frightened her overseers. She had become a symbol among the other slaves, not because she spoke loudly, but because she endured when others were punished. She shared her food. When someone fell, she helped them stand. Rumors spread among slaves about the silver girl with the burning eyes. Some believed she was waiting for someone. Others thought she would lead them one day. She said nothing, but inside, her heart counted the years since that rainy promise. She didn't know if Elias was alive, but she refused to believe he was gone. The galaxy kept burning. Worlds kept falling, and across the stars, two souls moved through their separate paths. One trained for war, the other survived in chains. Neither of them knew how or when their lives would cross again, but fate was moving. Slowly, like the gears of an ancient machine. Every decision, every battle, every whisper in the darkness pulled them closer. Their promise had not died, it had simply gone silent, waiting for the right moment to awaken again. The human resistance. The war had spread like a storm across the galaxy, leaving broken worlds and silent cities in its path. For humans, survival was no longer a matter of defending borders. It had become a desperate fight to keep their species from being crushed under the weight of a vast alien empire. Fleets were scattered, governments fractured, and many colonies were cut off from the central command. But even in this darkness, humans did what they had always done best. They adapted. They built resistance cells in abandoned stations, in asteroid belts, and inside the hollowed remains of destroyed ships. They turned ruins into bases and whispers into plans. From the ashes of broken fleets, the Terran resistance was born. Elias, now a young man, had grown strong through discipline and purpose. The promise he made as a boy had shaped every decision he took since the day he left his home behind. While others trained to become soldiers because they were forced to, Elias trained because he had chosen a path. He spent years in military academies, mastering both physical combat and the complex language of space warfare. His instructors often said that Elias had the cold patience of a machine and the burning heart of a human who refused to lose. He wasn't loud, but his presence carried a quiet authority that made others follow. His first missions were on small resistance ships, raiding supply convoys and striking at communication nodes. These missions were dangerous, often ending in chaos, yet Elias thrived. He quickly gained a reputation for finding unconventional solutions, where others saw only hopeless situations. He saw patterns, weak points, and timing. During one critical operation, when his squad was cornered by enemy forces in a debris field, Elias used the broken hulls of destroyed freighters to create a maze of traps, turning the enemy's numerical advantage into confusion. The mission was a success, and his commanders began to take notice. As the months turned into years, Elias rose through the ranks of the resistance, becoming a tactical officer, then a strategist trusted with planning large-scale operations. He spent sleepless nights in dark strategy rooms, staring at holographic star maps, tracing supply routes, and intercepting encrypted messages. Every red marker on those maps represented pain, slavery, or destruction, and among them, he always searched for one thing: information about slave routes, transport ships, or any sign of the silver-skinned girl with blue eyes. He didn't speak her name to anyone, but in his mind, she was present in every battle, every decision. She was the silent reason he kept pushing forward. The resistance itself was not a single army, but a network of human fleets, militias, smugglers, and even deserters from regular forces. Bound by a shared goal to break free from alien control, they operated in hidden sectors, striking hard and vanishing before the enemy could respond. Elias fit perfectly into this world of shifting alliances and unpredictable missions. He learned how to navigate between desperate politicians and reckless captains, how to use limited resources to strike maximum damage. He earned the trust of people twice his age by never backing down and by always keeping his word. During one operation, Elias's fleet intercepted a cargo vessel suspected of transporting war materials. But when they boarded it, they found something far more horrifying. Hundreds of alien and human slaves locked in stasis pods. Their bodies were frozen, their faces calm but pale. Like statues trapped in nightmares, Elias walked through the rows of pods slowly, his breath catching as his eyes scanned every face, hoping, searching. He didn't find Auri that day, but the experience carved something deeper inside him. It wasn't just about one girl anymore. It was about thousands, millions, all living under the same cruelty she had endured. His personal promise had grown into something larger, a mission to destroy the system that made slavery possible. Elias began to form his own specialized unit within the resistance, a small but elite team that focused on freeing captured convoys and striking deep behind enemy lines. His unit operated like a blade, silent, precise, and deadly. They hit slave routes the Empire thought were untouchable, rescuing people who had lost all hope. The rescued whispered stories about him, calling him the Ghost Captain, a human who appeared from nowhere and shattered chains before vanishing into the void. Elias never accepted the title, but deep inside, he allowed himself to believe that maybe Auri, somewhere out there, might hear these whispers and know that he was coming. Meanwhile, the alien empire began to take notice. Reports of disrupted routes and growing human resistance reached their high command. They started hunting Elias's unit specifically, setting traps and using false slave transports to lure him in. Several times his team barely escaped with their lives. One mission ended in disaster when an enemy ambush destroyed half their ships. Elias blamed himself for every lost life. He spent long nights alone in the observation decks, staring at the endless stars, questioning if his personal vow was worth so many sacrifices. But every time doubt grew, he remembered her face behind the cage bars, the rain falling, and the way her hand had touched his through the cold metal. That memory reignited his determination. Elias understood something that many leaders did not. Humans could not win through strength alone. The alien empire was vast, its fleets endless, its technology superior, but humans had something the empire didn't: the ability to inspire, to unite under a single story. So Elias began to spread that story, not through speeches but through actions. Each freed convoy, each daring escape, each impossible victory carried a message. Humanity would not break, and neither would he. As the resistance grew, Elias became one of its central figures. Though still young, his name was spoken in strategic councils with respect. He never sought power for its own sake. He sought the path that would take him closer to the heart of the empire, closer to where Auri might be. The boy who once gave bread to a slave girl had become a man who could shape the course of a galactic war. And yet, in the silence of his quarters, when the lights dimmed and the stars stretched endlessly outside, he still whispered her name like a prayer carried by the void. Whispers of the silver girl years of war had carved Elias into a man with sharp instincts and a heart that burned with quiet resolve. He had fought countless battles, led daring raids, and outsmarted enemies who thought humans were beneath them. Yet, despite all his victories, a single question haunted him every night. Where was she? Somewhere out there, in the cold spread of stars, Auri was either alive, waiting, or lost forever. He refused to accept the last possibility. Over time, his search had become more than longing. It had turned into an obsession woven into his military strategies. Every intercepted transmission, every whispered report from freed slaves, every captured log was scanned for the slightest trace of her. He knew it was like searching for a single flame in a storm, but he also knew that if that flame still burned, he would find it. The breakthrough came during a raid on a heavily guarded slave transport vessel drifting through a quiet trade corridor. Elias and his unit struck fast and silent, disabling the ship's engines before it could call for help. When they boarded, they expected to find weapons or high-ranking prisoners. Instead, they found rows upon rows of exhausted slaves, both human and alien, packed into dark compartments like forgotten cargo. The rescue went smoothly, and while medics tended to the survivors, one of the freed alien elders asked to speak with Elias privately. The elder's voice trembled, but his eyes carried the weight of a secret that had been hidden for too long. He spoke of a girl with silver skin and eyes that glowed like a comet's heart. a girl who had been moved from world to world, surviving everything the Empire threw at her. According to the Elder, she had become a legend among the enslaved, a quiet figure who gave strength when others broke. They called her the Silver Ghost, because no matter how tightly the chains were bound, her spirit slipped through. She was rumored to have freed other slaves in secret, to have sabotaged factory systems, and to have inspired underground movements within the Empire's own slave camps. The Elder claimed that she was last seen being transported toward the core worlds, the heart of the alien empire, a place from which no slave had ever returned. Elias listened in silence, his heart pounding so hard that it felt like the walls of the ship vibrated with it. The description, the courage, the timing, everything pointed to one name, Auri. He didn't say it out loud, but in his mind her name rang like a bell that had been silent for too long. He thanked the Elder and walked to the observation deck, staring at the endless stars as if expecting her face to appear among them. For the first time in years, the distant flame he had been chasing flickered brighter. She was alive, not just surviving but fighting back. She had become something far greater than the scared girl in a cage. She had become a symbol, and now he had a direction. The core worlds, however, were not just another target. They were the center of the alien empire's power, protected by massive fleets, planetary defense grids, and surveillance systems that could detect even a shadow. No resistance fleet had ever ventured that deep and returned. To plan a mission, there was to step into the jaws of a beast with no escape. But Elias did not hesitate, his officers argued, warning him that it was suicide, that risking their limited forces for one person, no matter who she was reckless. Elias listened calmly, but deep inside, his decision had already been made. He had built his entire life on a promise. And now that he had proof, no wall of warships would keep him away. He began gathering information from every corner of the Resistance network. He contacted smugglers who had bribed their way into inner systems, interrogated captured officers, and cross-referenced ship movements until a picture began to emerge. There were whispers of a hidden slave transfer facility orbiting a crimson star near the core, a place where the Empire sent those who were considered too dangerous to be kept with others. If Auri had inspired revolts, if she had become a symbol of hope, then this was where they would keep her, locked away from the masses but not destroyed. Because the Empire often turned symbols into trophies, displaying them as proof of their control. As Elias pieced the puzzle together, something remarkable began to happen within the Resistance. Stories of the Silver Ghost spread through human ranks as well. Soldiers whispered in dim mess halls about the alien girl who defied the Empire from within. Some believed she was a myth. Others swore they had heard her name from rescued prisoners. The story gave them hope. It made them believe that not all battles were fought with guns. Some were fought through quiet endurance and unbroken will. Elias noticed how morale improved whenever the story was mentioned, and though he never revealed his personal connection, he let the tale grow. He understood its power. One night, standing alone on the deck of his ship, Elias stared at the crimson-red star on his map. He imagined Auri somewhere under that light, perhaps locked in a cold cell, perhaps still whispering promises to herself to stay alive. He thought of their childhood moment, the bread, the rain, the cage, and he realized that their story had expanded beyond them. What began as a vow between two children had turned into a spark that touched thousands of lives. It wasn't just about finding her anymore. It was about reaching the heart of the enemy and proving that hope could infiltrate even their darkest places. Elias submitted a mission proposal to the High Command of the Resistance, not just for a rescue, but for a deep infiltration into the core. The plan was ambitious and dangerous. It would require stealth, coordination, and the kind of courage that few possessed. Many doubted it could work. Some laughed. But a few saw the fire in his eyes and remembered his past victories. Slowly, allies began to gather around him, pilots, engineers, and operatives who believed in impossible missions. They didn't know the full reason behind his determination, but they felt it. It was contagious. As preparations began in secret, Elias carried the whispers with him like a beacon. Somewhere near the Empire's beating heart, the Silver Ghost waited. and he intended to reach her no matter the cost. The war had taken much from him, but it had never taken his word. The promise he made as a boy was no longer a soft whisper in the rain. It was a war cry echoing across the stars, and the galaxy was about to hear it. The return. The war had entered a dangerous new phase. The alien empire, growing desperate under the pressure of the resistance, began tightening its control, crushing uprisings within its own territory, and striking harder than ever along the borders. Entire fleets vanished in ambushes, hidden cells were exposed, and supply lines that had once been stable turned fragile overnight. For months, Elias and his unit operated in silence, gathering intelligence and preparing for their most daring mission yet, the infiltration of the core worlds. Every step brought new risks, but Elias never wavered, because the whispers of the Silver Ghost had become his map, and the Crimson Star was his destination. But fate has a way of shifting even the best-laid plans. Before the infiltration could begin, something unexpected happened. A message arrived at the Resistance base, carried by a diplomatic vessel flying a white truce flag. No one trusted such signals from the Empire, and the fleet prepared for an ambush. Fighter wings circled the vessel, scanning for hidden weapons. But the ship remained silent, its engines powered down, and a small delegation stepped onto the landing platform, led by a figure wrapped in a cloak of deep blue. Her posture was regal, her step steady, and though her face was hidden beneath a hood, the moment Elias saw her through the observation screen, his heart stopped. The base's command center was filled with tension as the cloaked figure walked through the metallic corridors. Surrounded by armed guards, commanders whispered, soldiers watched from corners, and everyone tried to guess the purpose of this strange arrival. When she entered the main hall, the lights dimmed slightly as the security system scanned her. She slowly lowered her hood, and a wave of stunned silence swept through the room. Her skin shimmered faintly under the lights like polished silver. Her glowing blue eyes burned with calm fire, and the scars along her wrists told stories without words. It was Auri, but not the fragile girl in a cage. She stood tall, strong, with the quiet authority of someone who had endured unimaginable storms and refused to break. Elias was standing at the far end of the hall when their eyes met. For a moment, the war, the walls, the soldiers, and the years disappeared. It was as if the rain was falling again, as if a boy and a girl were staring through rusty bars. Their gazes locked in silence, and neither of them needed words to understand. She had survived, she had returned, and the promise they once made had not been forgotten. Auri stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. She revealed that she had not come as a prisoner or a messenger, but as a representative of a rebellion rising inside the empire itself. Over the years, she had quietly built networks of slaves, workers, and even sympathetic alien officers. Planting the seeds of revolt deep within the core, the Empire had underestimated her, thinking that breaking her body would break her spirit. But instead, she had become a spark that ignited hidden fires. Her return to the humans was not simply to reunite with Elias. It was to propose something that could change the entire war, an alliance between the human resistance and the slave rebellion. Her words struck like thunder across the hall. Some commanders doubted her, others admired her courage, many feared betrayal. But Auri stood firm. Her presence carried a truth that no weapon could fake. She spoke of the suffering she had seen, of the thousands who whispered in the dark about freedom, of the soldiers who secretly passed messages to her in the mines, of the hope that had grown around her name. She revealed that parts of the Empire were crumbling from within, and if the resistance struck at the right time, they could break the enemy's heart in one decisive blow. Elias listened to every word, his emotions fighting between disbelief, pride, and something deeper. He had imagined this moment countless times, wondering if he would find her broken or lost. But the woman standing before him was stronger than any fantasy he had built. She was not someone who needed to be saved anymore. She had saved herself, and now she had come to stand beside him. Later that night, when the hall had emptied and only the stars remained outside the command deck's glass, Elias and Auri met alone for the first time in years. Neither spoke at first. Words felt too small for everything that had happened. They simply stood there, side by side, looking at the galaxy they had both been shaped by. Finally, Auri broke the silence. "You kept your word," she said softly, her voice carrying the same gentle strength he remembered. Elias turned to her, his throat tight. "And so did you," he replied. For a long time, they talked, not as a commander and a rebel leader, but as two souls bound by a promise made in a muddy market long ago. They shared stories of survival, of near deaths and narrow escapes, of dreams that had kept them alive when everything else crumbled. Each story revealed not just what they had endured, but who they had become. By morning, the Resistance fleet was buzzing with new energy. The return of the Silver Ghost spread like wildfire. Soldiers whispered in awe, engineers worked faster, and strategists redrew their plans with new hope. The galaxy had shifted overnight. The empire that once seemed untouchable now had cracks deep within its core, and at the center of this change stood two figures who had once been nothing more than a boy and a girl sharing bread through iron bars. Elias watched Auri as she spoke with officers, her movements confident, her presence commanding. She was not just a symbol anymore. She was a force. He realized that the promise they had made had grown into something much larger than themselves. It had become a story carried by thousands, a light in the dark corners of space, and now, after all the years of searching, their paths had finally aligned again. Not in desperation, but in strength. The war was entering its most dangerous chapter, and they would face it together. The Alliance. The days following Auri's arrival changed the atmosphere within the Resistance like a storm clearing a heavy sky. Where there had once been whispers of defeat and exhaustion, there was now movement. The story of the Silver Ghost had spread through human fleets like fire across dry grass. Soldiers spoke her name with respect, pilots painted silver streaks on their ships, and commanders began to see possibilities that had once felt unreachable. But inspiration alone could not win a war. Elias and Auri both understood that the true challenge had just begun. Forming an alliance between the human resistance and the alien rebellion inside the Empire would require careful planning, trust, and daring moves that could not fail. In the underground chambers of the Resistance's command base, strategy meetings stretched deep into the nights. Around the table sat human commanders hardened by years of brutal war, engineers who had kept ships alive against impossible odds, intelligence officers who had spent their lives decrypting enemy movements, and now, for the first time, alien envoys smuggled out from the core to represent the growing slave rebellion. Tension filled the air in those first meetings. Old wounds and centuries of mistrust could not be erased overnight. Some officers questioned whether aliens could ever be trusted after years of enslavement and war. Others feared betrayal. But Auri stood in the center of the room like a calm flame. Her words carried neither arrogance nor apology, only truth. She spoke of the hidden rebellion that had been growing like roots under the Empire's foundations. She described secret gatherings in the dark mines, coded songs whispered between factory workers, and quiet acts of defiance that the Empire had ignored until it was too late. She revealed names of alien officers who had turned against their masters, locations of supply depots vulnerable from within, and communication channels hidden beneath layers of Imperial code. As she spoke, the room shifted, suspicion slowly giving way to cautious hope. Elias watched her with a mixture of pride and focus. He had seen her strength as a child, but now he was witnessing the leader she had become. Elias added his voice to the strategy, mapping out how human fleets could move in coordination with the rebellion's internal strikes. He spoke of precise hit-and-fade operations, supply line disruptions, and coordinated planetary uprisings that could break the Empire's logistics in one sweeping wave. For the first time in the war, there was a real possibility to strike not from the outside alone, but from both sides at once, crushing the Empire between fire from without and rebellion from within. The idea was bold, dangerous, and it demanded complete trust between groups that had once been enemies. Slowly, plans began to take shape. The first stage involved small joint operations. Human strike teams and alien rebel cells began working together to hit lightly guarded outposts near the core. These missions were not just military objectives, they were tests of loyalty and communication. On one mission, a human squad and alien workers successfully sabotaged a massive fuel depot deep in enemy territory. The explosion lit up the skies of 3 nearby moons, sending shockwaves through the Imperial fleet and proving that this new alliance was real. Each success tightened the bond between the two sides, replacing fear with respect. As the weeks passed, Auri moved between rebel leaders and human strategists with ease. She became the bridge that connected two worlds. She listened more than she spoke, understanding both cultures, both pains, both strengths. Her presence reminded everyone why they were fighting. Elias, on the other hand, focused on logistics, timing, and turning their scattered forces into a blade sharp enough to pierce the Empire's heart. Together, they formed a leadership duo that balanced fire and steel, inspiration and strategy. Yet not everyone accepted the alliance easily. Some human factions saw the rebellion as a temporary tool, while some alien groups feared that humans would dominate them after the Empire's fall. There were arguments, threats, and moments when the fragile bond nearly cracked. Elias and Auri stood firm during these storms, confronting doubts head-on, reminding everyone that their enemy was watching, waiting for division to tear them apart. In one heated meeting, when two commanders nearly came to blows, Auri slammed her hand on the table and spoke with a voice that echoed through the halls. "The Empire fears only one thing," she said, "unity." Her words cut through the noise like a blade, and silence followed. As their joint forces grew bolder, the Empire responded with brutal crackdowns. Entire sectors were locked down, rebellions were crushed, and fleets were redirected towards suspected resistance strongholds. Every victory they achieved was met with heavier counterattacks. But, unlike before, humanity was no longer fighting alone. In the factories, alien workers rose in synchronized strikes. On distant moons, human strike teams appeared where the Empire least expected. In deep space, coordinated assaults shattered convoys thought to be secure. Slowly, the war that had been one-sided began to tilt. Elias spent long hours on the command deck of his flagship, watching the star maps light up with simultaneous strikes. His mind processed strategies, but his heart remembered the muddy cage, the promise, and the silver-eyed girl. Now she stood beside him, not as a memory, but as a commander. Together, they were shaping a revolution that neither of them could have imagined as children. Auri often joined him during these late nights, standing quietly by the observation windows, looking out at the stars. They rarely spoke during these moments. Their silence said more than words ever could. Eventually, the Resistance Council and the Rebel Network agreed on the final stage of their plan: a joint assault on the core. Time to coincide with a massive uprising within the Empire itself. It was risky, perhaps even suicidal, but everyone in that room understood the stakes. This was not just another mission. It was the strike that could decide the fate of the galaxy. If they succeeded, the Empire's chains would shatter. If they failed, their movement would be crushed beyond recovery. Elias looked around the room, at humans and aliens sitting side by side, at faces marked by pain, determination, and hope. He felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Belief, the promise he had made as a boy, had grown far beyond him. It had become a living force that united entire species. He turned to Auri, their eyes meeting once again, and in that look they shared not just memories, but the weight of everything they were about to do. The alliance was ready, and the Empire would soon hear their roar. The vow fulfilled. The galaxy stood on the edge of a storm. Decades of oppression, war, and quiet suffering had built up like pressure inside a star, waiting for the moment to explode. Now, under the united banner of humans and alien rebels, that moment had come. The alliance had prepared for months, weaving together intelligence, timing, and courage into a single strike. Their plan was simple in words, but nearly impossible in execution. A simultaneous uprising within the Empire's core worlds combined with a coordinated fleet assault from outside. If both strikes succeeded, the Empire's heart would be exposed. If they failed, everything they had built would be destroyed in one crushing counterattack. Elias stood on the command deck of his flagship, surrounded by flickering holographic displays showing the movement of fleets and uprisings across dozens of star systems. His officers moved with focused precision, every person aware that history was about to be written in fire and blood. He looked at the stars outside the massive viewport, the same stars he had once stared at as a boy, dreaming of finding a girl behind rusty bars. Now, those stars were battlefields, and he was one of the men who would shape their future. Auri entered the deck, her silver skin reflecting the dim blue lights of the control panels. Her presence brought a calm strength to the room. She wore a dark commander's coat, its collar lined with subtle silver embroidery that caught the light with each movement. Around her wrist, she still carried the faint scars of her past. But they no longer represented weakness. They were symbols of everything she had survived. When she walked beside Elias, the entire crew felt the weight of their combined resolve. It wasn't just a human commander and an alien rebel leader standing there. It was the embodiment of a promise that had crossed time, war, and pain. The first wave of the attack began with silence. Deep inside the core worlds, slave workers and factory engineers suddenly stopped their machines. Miners dropped their tools, factory lines went quiet, and transport routes stalled. The Empire's sensors detected malfunctions but failed to understand that it was not a technical failure. It was rebellion within minutes. Key installations went offline, communications faltered, and panic began to spread through the Empire's inner sectors. At the same moment, the Resistance fleet emerged from hyperspace like a blade cutting through the night. Their ships formed a spearhead aimed directly at the Empire's central defense ring. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Imperial fleets swarmed like waves of steel, their cannons lighting up the darkness with violent flashes. Human and rebel ships answered with precision, slipping through gaps, striking weak points, and using every trick Elias had taught them through years of war. In the factories, uprisings turned into full-scale revolts. Alien soldiers loyal to the rebellion turned their weapons against their commanders, and streets that had once echoed with the footsteps of the oppressed now thundered with the march of the free. Elias's voice echoed through the fleet as he coordinated movements with calm intensity. He had spent years preparing for this moment. Every ship's movement, every strike, every fallback point was part of a larger rhythm he had composed like music. His mind processed chaos like a strategist, but his heart burned like the boy who once reached through cage bars. Auri, meanwhile, led the inner rebellion, moving through hidden channels she had built long ago, appearing at critical moments to rally fighters and turn collapsing positions into victories. Her people followed her like they were following a star. The Empire fought back with brutal force, unleashing weapons that had never been seen outside the core. Planetary cannons fired beams that sliced through ships like knives. Elite guard fleets appeared from hyperspace, surrounding the Resistance in a deadly trap. For a moment, the tide shifted dangerously. Ships exploded, communication lines faltered, and fear crept into the ranks. Elias made the hardest decision of his life. He ordered his fleet to split into two groups, one to hold the line, the other to push deeper toward the heart. He knew this choice meant sacrificing many, but it was the only way to reach the Empire's control station, the source of their power. Auri's forces on the ground simultaneously stormed the Central Command Citadel, a massive structure that rose like a black spear above the city. Inside, Imperial elites waited with advanced weapons and centuries of arrogance. The fighting was fierce and close, corridors filled with smoke and screams, but Auri moved through it like a storm. Every step a defiance of the chains they once forced upon her. At the Citadel's heart, she connected with Elias through a secure channel, their voices steady despite the chaos around them. Together, they synchronized their final push, fleet and rebellion, striking in perfect unity. The decisive moment came when Elias's flagship broke through the last defensive wall. A massive beam cannon targeted their ship, threatening to destroy it in one shot. Elias could have ordered a retreat, but he didn't. He ordered all power to the forward shield and pushed ahead. Leading the charge himself, the blast struck. Shaking the ship violently, alarms screamed, decks cracked, but the flagship held. Through the fire and smoke, their fleet surged forward and unleashed everything they had on the control station. At the same time, Auri and her fighters stormed the Citadel's core, disabling the command relay that coordinated the Empire's forces. The fall of the control station echoed like a thunderclap through the galaxy. Without centralized command, the Imperial fleets faltered. Slave rebellions exploded in every corner of the Empire. Systems that had been silent for centuries lit up with the cries of the free. The Empire, once thought eternal, began to crumble like stone under a rising tide. When the last cannon went silent and the stars stopped burning with weapon fire, Elias and Auri stood together on the balcony of the liberated Citadel. Looking over the city that had once been the Empire's heart, the air was filled with the sounds of celebration and disbelief. People of different species embraced. Soldiers cheered. Children looked up at the night sky as if seeing it for the first time. Elias turned to Auri, his face marked by exhaustion and pride. She looked back at him, her glowing blue eyes reflecting the starlight. In that moment, words were unnecessary. They had walked through fire, carried the weight of millions, and fulfilled the promise made under the rain long ago. Their hands met, fingers intertwining not as a symbol of conquest, but as a vow fulfilled. The boy who promised freedom and love had become the man who fought beside her. The girl in the cage had become the leader who returned with an army. Together, they stood as living proof that hope, once born, could survive anything. Under the starlit sky of a freed world, their promise echoed through generations. Songs would be sung of the boy and the silver girl, of the night the Empire fell, and of the day two souls kept their word when the galaxy needed it most.